friends, Brian Hodgkiss to be specific, said, "Well, it's not Saturday here, it's Sunday." It was a minute after midnight there, but he decided he should give me a hard time. Well, anyway, happy weekend Zoom session, guys, and welcome back. And we have yet another guest speaker whose face isn't unfamiliar here because he's been a participant many times. And I would like to introduce a friend of mine, a square dance caller, a Caller Lab accredited caller coach, a past member of Caller Lab's Board of Governors, a past member of Caller Lab's Executive Committee, a fellow mental image caller, although we're both site callers, but that's another story. The gentleman who hosted the first and so far only square dance cruise I've ever been on. What did I miss, Daryl?
I can't remember.
A retired full-time caller, retired from full-time, but not totally retired, from Portland, Oregon. I'd like to introduce Mr. Daryl Clendenin. Daryl, take it away.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Morning having more to do with what time you wake up than anything else. And any minute now, I'm going to be awake and able to do this. I know it's 11 o'clock where dawn is. It's 8 o'clock in the morning where I'm sitting. So, and I've been up for 3 hours already. So it's not all that early for me. Now, everybody says that they have a bad memory. Lord, I've never heard that so many times. Nothing I've heard more than that. We have good memories. And the most important thing that we have as square dance callers for a tool is our memories. My worst nightmare in all the years that I was calling was that I was going to wake up some morning and say, bow to that it would all be gone. I couldn't afford to have that. That would not be good. That memory is too darn important. Absolutely everything that I did as a caller, everything you do as a caller, excuse me, is going to involve memory in some way. Even if you're a total reader caller. And I have nothing against reading for calling. I think it's kind of a cheating yourself out of some of the more pleasant parts of being a caller. But even if you're reading anything, you're going to have to use your memory. You have to know what sounds those particular letters represent, and you memorize that. So that put aside, it's how you use your memory. I know everybody, absolutely everybody has been introduced to somebody, and 5 seconds later, you've forgotten their name. It takes no time at all, right? You just met them. Hasn't been a full minute ago you met this person, you've already forgotten their name. Now that's purely because you didn't pay any attention to begin with, right? So the number one rule of memory is pay attention. Really look at what's happening. If you listen in the first place and you say, oh, nice to meet you, Dawn, and you talk for a while, and every few minutes you say, Dawn, I remember this. Dawn, I remember that. Dawn, have you ever, whatever the conversation happens to be, use the name 3 or 4 times. You're not going to forget it. You're going to remember it as long as you need to remember it. if the chances of you're ever seeing this person again are slim, you'll forget it. If it's the person that's hiring you for square dance 6 months from now, you'll remember it because it's important to you. So this business of short-term memory and long-term memory, yeah, it's fairly unintentional, but it works the same way. First thing, if you pay attention, it's probably going to stay there longer. Now, with that said, and I told Dawn I'm not going to talk a long time today. I hope that comes true. With that said, Dawn, you're going to play with me for a while here, right?
I've just unmuted. Sure, let's play.
Okay. Here's our little game. You're going to give me, let's see, you live on an island, is it?
I live on an island.
Okay. And you have to take a ferry to get there?
Unless you can afford an airplane, yes.
Okay. How far from the ferry terminal is your house?
7 miles.
7 miles. Okay, let's assume that I'm going to be going to Martha's Vineyard, right? To call a square dance for Dawn. And I'm going to rent a car when I get off that ferry boat and drive to Dawn's house. He's going to give me directions on how to get there. And they better be pretty simple if he's got a lot of different things to do in there. So keep the directions simple, Don, and tell me, start out. What do I do after I get off the ferry and get in the car and I'm pulling out of the parking lot?
You mean I got to tell you how to get to a car rental place too?
No, they've got a shuttle bus that'll do that, right?
It's got a shuttle to the park and ride. There are a couple of car rental places within walking distance, but let's make believe that you rented the car back in Cape Cod and then you drove over on the ferry because car rentals were much less expensive over there. Of course, the ferry was much more expensive, but
okay.
So you want me to tell people how to find my personal home?
Yes.
Well, guess what?
Be gentle.
I'm giving you a hard time now, Daryl. I generally just send them to my website because I have directions there because we had a bed and breakfast for 23 years and I haven't taken the website down. When you leave the ferry parking lot, you turn left. It's a very short road and there's not much else to do. You go to about a block to the first intersection, which is called Five Corners, but you don't need to know that. You don't like all that extra stuff.
Don't tell me any, just give me simple directions. The minute you start putting in all of this fill-in patter, that's fill-in patter. Every time you start putting some of that in there, it might confuse what I need to remember. So I'm going to go to the end of the road. I'm going to turn right.
You're going to turn right.
Good.
And go about 5 miles.
Okay.
Approximately 5. You will get to an intersection where there's a road that veers off to the right that's called North Road and probably no sign. There's sign to Menemsha. Turn right there. Go 1.6 miles. And you're there. In 1.5 miles, you'll see the town line sign.
Whoa, back up your town. You're giving me lots of directions. Okay, we're going to leave the parking lot. We're going to turn right. We're going to go.
You're going to leave the parking lot and turn left to the first intersection in one block.
Oh, that's right. And then we turn right and we go 5 miles?
About.
Okay, about 5 miles. And then we're going to
you look for a sign to a road to the right that says Menemsha. And you follow that road for 1.6 miles. At that point, you'll see a small white oval sign. When you get close enough to it, it says Summer Suite Bed and Breakfast. You turn right into that driveway. That's my driveway.
Okay, going to turn left out of the parking lot, go up a short distance, turn right. We're going to go about 5 miles. We're going to see a sign that says a road to Menemsha.
Close.
Okay, and
You, as I recall, you still keep.
excuse me, that's a beer right, am I right?
Yes.
Then we're going to go look for a small white oval sign that says what?
Summer Sweet Bed and Breakfast.
Summer Sweet Bed and Breakfast, and that's your house. I'm going to turn to the right and go into that.
That's part way there. One more direction.
Oh, one more direction.
The driveway is shared by 2 homes. You have to bear right at the fork. There's a little sign that says B and B, and we're the house that's further back on the right.
Okay. Did everybody follow all that? Don gave some confusing things to my mind as I went through there, and I stopped it. Okay, but still, I think probably everybody that's sitting there listening now could visualize leaving, turning left, going up, turning right, going about 5 miles before he has the next turn, which is going to be veering to the right. Sign says Menenchen. Now, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. I have absolutely no idea where this place is or anything.
As I recall, Daryl, you couldn't even pronounce Massachusetts correctly back in the day, but that's another story.
Yeah, that's another story. Okay, but we're going to go a mile and blah, 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 until we see this little white sign that says bed and breakfast. We're going to turn right there, and we're going to come to a Y, and we're going to take the right side of it, and his is second, the last one on the right. Am I close there, Don?
Your directions are close. You're still 3,000 miles away. Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, that.
Yeah, you got it.
That's the thing. That's called traffic, isn't it? And that's what we deal with in our choreography is actually traffic. It's no different. If you're going to learn or memorize any types of patterns, whether they're full figures like in a singing call or small chunks of choreography that we call modules, you're going to learn them the same way. Now, trust me, I don't sit down and say, well, okay, with a module, I'm going to turn half by the right, half by the left, and call that a swing through all of these different movements. When it comes to modules, you jump from here to here, like that. That's the idea of a module. You've already traveled it enough times that you know what it does. You know where to start. You know where it finishes. Put it in there. But it's movement. It's traffic. Always traffic, right? That's the important thing. What did I do with Dawn when we went through that? I said, wait a minute, and we started over. Wait a minute, started over. Through the years, I've had the very, very nice pleasure of being able to work with other callers and quartets. And we would get together and rehearse whatever we were going to do. And we'd always try to come up with something new as far as new singing calls and what have you. And it always seemed difficult to get them to learn all of the lyrics that went along with the singing call. I'd have them all printed out for them, lay it out in front of them. But until I reached over and turned those pages over to where they couldn't see the printed word, they never remembered them. So I'd let them see it long enough that they could go through it and tell their mind, I have to remember this. Turn it back over again. They would pretty much remember it. Do that a few times, they had the words. They had to put their brain to work, had to make it happen. Same thing with this traffic. You have to put it into your head. It doesn't happen automatically. When it comes to some of the things we have to memorize, like singing calls, we have additional clues or tools that work for us. Rhythm being one, rhyming being another. Now we do some rhyming in our pattern and everything. You say up to the middle and back you reel, pass through, wheel and deal. You know, that works in there. But if you can think of this, 'twas brillig in the slitty toes, the giant gimble in the waves, all mimsy were the boar groves and moans rats outgrave. That has a rhythm. It has rhymes. You might remember, oh, here's a better one. You probably know this one. Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was white as snow, and everywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to go. Now that has the same rhythm as the Jabberwock. Maybe a little easier to remember because it didn't have all of those words that you don't understand or aren't familiar with, but it's the same thing. And when we do our songs, we've got those things working with us. In patter, we don't have it so much. So somebody before we started here was saying, I have some patterns that I'd like to remember. Well, you probably heard me say over and over again in the sessions that I've sat through, keep it simple. Keep it simple. Don't let anything get so long that it's difficult to remember. Now, if Don had 5 or 6 more turns in there, it would have taken a lot longer to figure out what he was saying. We would have had to repeat it more. Repetition is a big thing when you're working memory. It doesn't happen automatically. Reading it doesn't really do any good. Reading it over and over and over and over and over and again doesn't do any good. When I was in grammar school, they talked about this thing called a state of being verb. I couldn't remember what the heck they were. I don't know. It was in English. I can tell you what they are. There is, am, was, were, shall, will, should, would, could, may, can, be, being, been, become, became. There's our English state of being verbs. I remember that from probably when I was, I don't know, 12 years old or something. It was important, so I made a point of learning them. And how to do it? I did it partly with rhythm, not so much with rhyme, but it was something that was important. So if it's important to you, you'll remember it if you make yourself remember it. How do we apply all of this to square dance calling? I relate everything to that basic traffic pattern, which you call chicken plucker, right? For a variety of reasons. It's simple. It's very simple. All you do is flop back and forth across the grid. Am I right? Of course I'm right. I have to be because that's all there is. Now, when I say that, I'm always eliminating circle figures. Stars, Alamo style waves, what have you, which to me, those are basically the same thing as being at home, a static square, because it's worked around this way. But when you start working east and west, north and south, you're in that grid. And there's very few places that you can go in that grid. I don't care if you're in an ocean wave, two-phase line, diamond formation, it doesn't make any difference. That grid is still going to be there. And it's what's going to be important to you, where you are in that grid, with anything you're trying to remember, relate it to that grid, and in that grid, possibly depending on how you're calling, what particular resolution method that you're using, whether it's sight, modular, or mental image, whatever, relate it to where the element left is in that grid. That makes it easier to say, okay, I'm here, I need to go there. Now that grid basically is just like a city block. Doesn't look a lot different than the box that you're sitting in right now that I'm looking at you. It's a rectangle. It's not square, it's a rectangle. And you can only go so many places in that rectangle. Now, you can go from here to here as couples. You can go through the middle of it as couples, right through here. But two-face lines here, or couples through the middle, pass through, trade by, right and left through, pass through, trade by, on and left, chicken plucker. It's not a biggie. To memorize a traffic pattern, it's a whole lot harder to remember Don's, but I'll tell you what, he'd been doing that for so many years, that same flip-flop back and forth from going over the mainland and catching ferry, and he knows his way home from there. How do you know your way home, Don? You've done it so many times. How could you not know your way home? Get familiar. Get familiar with that traffic pattern. Chicken plucker. It's not that hard. It's what you want. Now, when it comes to modules, don't memorize full figures per pattern. Don't do that. It's too long. You're not going to remember it. Do it in bits and pieces. Apply everything you do to that traffic pattern. Doing modules. And Donald told me, and I'd never heard this before. Don, thank you so much. You said everybody uses modules. Everybody. Now, if somebody's reading all their material, might not realize that what they're reading is just a collection of modules, but that's what it is. So keep it simple, keep them short, keep them easy to remember. If you remember them with the idea of applying this to that basic traffic pattern, it's going to make it easier to remember. With that, I'm kind of dragging on, aren't I, Don?
I was wondering if anybody had any other thoughts on memory techniques that have helped you.
The huge thing that kicked me forward in my calling was realizing that, as Daryl pointed out, I already know a bunch of modules, and they were way smaller than the modules that people in caller school were trying to teach me. They were rotate a box left, one square, rotate a box right, 190 degrees. And then when I saw a middle image, that allowed me to realize that there were only 4 kinds of calls once I had control over box rotation. And if I could remember which call was in those 4 kinds, then yeah, all of a sudden everything got way, way easier. But that realizing that modules are not something, you know, not these huge long 5 and 6 sequence things, but they're 2 and 3 call sequences, totally changed the way that I could remember things.
Daryl was.
Go ahead.
Yolanda, go ahead. You were going to talk.
Nope.
Nope. Okay. Daryl was talking about memorizing people's names when they introduce themselves. I've heard a lot of thoughts on that. One that Daryl said and really works is repeating the person's name in almost every other sentence for a while until it's burned into your short-term memory, at least for a while. And the thing that goes along with that is that people won't notice you're doing that. They like hearing their names. And so they'll just figure you're being more personable than not. Other people have talked about relating their red hair to, there are a bunch of tricks. I happen to have one trick for remembering names that I haven't heard other people use, and I'm not sure it works for me, but it does. But before I tell you what that is, definitely what Daryl said, when I talk to somebody and I generally try to introduce myself and get what their name is, I very frequently forget to listen. 2 seconds later, I can't remember unless I'm making a point of saying, I better remember this person's name. And I'm not ashamed to say, you just told me your name, but I can't remember it. Try again, and this time I'll pay attention. Anyway, what works for me is I picture another person that I know that has that same name. It'd be nice if it was something similar to that, the person I'm talking to in size or color or place in the world they're from or what have you. But for me, for some silly reason, when I see somebody, I can picture that other person, even if they have nothing in common with them, and remember their name that way. I recently was talking to somebody, we're talking about somebody, and it always took me a long time to figure out who the person was that also had that name, and I switched people in midstream, and now I remember that person's name because I can picture a more common person. Daryl's name I can remember. What do you think? I have a son named Daryl, spelled the same way he is. I'm trying to remember if we were friends before or after Daryl came on the scene. I think after. Oh, definitely after. Anyway, does anybody else have any other tricks for memorizing? And for choreographic modules and such, it's definitely easier to remember them if you can picture them. I mean, everybody remembers things differently, but for many of us, and I think what Daryl was saying is not only say, these are what the calls are to get me from here to here or to zero out.
Mm-hmm.
But picture moving through that 2 or 3 or 4 call sequence. And that will definitely help you with it.
Well, I heard something for the names a long time ago, Don. I was attending one of these professional development seminars, and a second generation Dale Carnegie type was holding it. His name was Richard Pryor. And there was a 3-step process for remembering names. Oh, I said process instead of process. And that was, the first step is you say to yourself, I'm getting better and better at remembering names. The second one is, when this person's introduced to me, I'm going to listen very carefully and try to remember his name. And then I'm going to use his name at least 3 times in the first 4 minutes that I'm talking to him. And that was it. So I guess the only thing we're missing is to get that attitude of I'm getting better and better at memorizing modules up front.
I think that's what the case is with me with names, is that I forget that first step. And, if I say, I better remember this guy's name, let's listen and see what it really is, and then use my memory technique, it works. But frequently I forget that first step. That's a great one. And say, that's why I have to ask them again, but this time I'm in a mindset to do it.
Pay attention. Pay attention. I think that's where we started today, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
That's right there. But that's good. Another thing about the use of memory for the caller. Modules don't have to be zeros and equivalents. They can be just something to move the dancers. But then we have specialized modules that not just move the dancers smoothly, and they're not as such zeros or equivalents. But for lack of a better term, I might call them formation modules. The modules that say I'm going to go from a corner box to right-hand 2-face lines. What am I going to call it? This and this and this. It's a module. Goes together. It takes me from this place to that place. It's not an equivalent for right and left through. It's not a zero, but it puts you in a particular place that you can take advantage of. I need to go from a right-hand wave to a left-hand wave. How do I do that? That's a module. And those can be very short. Right-hand wave to a left-hand wave. Everybody do U-turn back. Sort of works, doesn't it? They can be as long or as simple and short as you particularly make them. That's an important thing too. There again, everything relates back to that basic traffic pattern, the use of it. So keep that in mind.
When,
Go ahead.
no, finish your sentence, sorry.
Oh, it's fine.
When I think of memory relative to square dance calling, I think of my nemesis of remembering who started with whom every tip, a different set of people for sight calling. And I've got a few tricks that have finally helped me, but I'd be curious if other people have that do sight calling have that problem and how they solve it. Sight calling, memorize who started with whom.
That's a terrible problem for me, so I want to hear.
To the pay attention thing, I found early on that if I didn't write down the square, I was hosed. But if I did write down the square, I almost never had to refer back to my notes. So that process of, no, I really have to pay attention to this and I have to reprocess it and regurgitate my information is what helps me. And now I don't have to write down the square nearly as often.
Keith had a thumbs up on that. That was the first of my many points also, is work hard enough to find out a couple that you can remember, write it down. For pity's sake, don't ever let anybody look at your notes, because you can write as slanderous things as you want as long as it helps you memorize. But just the effort of trying to pick people out and then writing it down generally was enough for me to remember it. As Daryl said, pay attention. This is looking into what you're doing.
I always made a point. Now, I did a lot of traveling. Every summer, I spent about 3 months out on the road, calling to groups that I probably knew absolutely nobody when I got there. I was never late for a dance that I can recall. I was always there, lots time to set up the equipment, get everything ready, and be at the door when people came in and meet them right there at the door. I know darn good and well that a whole lot of people, when I reach out, shake their hands and everything at the door, they didn't recognize me. They were wondering who the heck this guy was that was there welcoming them. That's part of how I picked out some people that went together. I looked them over. When I started a dance by calling material that I knew was going to be simple enough that everybody was going to make it through. I would pick my adjacent couples. Now, I was a sight resolution caller. That's what I wound up doing. It was just a whole lot better than for me, where I was changing all the time. So I needed to have the 2 adjacent couples. But I called the first couple of figures simple enough that I could see them get to the corners. Once I knew who the people were and saw them go to the corners, I didn't have to worry about it. From that point on, throughout the dance, it was, well, they were corners last time, or I know these people. You just do. It's a matter of, like you say, pay attention. Am I going to say that I never forgot to look to see who belonged together before I got started? That'd be it now. It'd be a lie, you know that. I didn't let that bother me. Very seldom did I say, okay, everybody point to your corner. When everybody pointed to somebody different, didn't help a darn bit. But it didn't make any difference. Make a point of saying, oops, forgot to look. So what? Pick up the microphone again and go to work, do your job. Everybody makes mistakes. I wouldn't worry about it that much. I was never one to write anything down. If I took my eyes off the dancers, I'd lose something. So it's just not me. If you find something that works for you for that, more power to you. Do the job. And that's all it amounts to. Do your job. Get up there, call them a nice dance, whatever it takes to do it, even if you have to read it. Memory, is your most important asset. It's the thing that's going to let you call a good dance. A good dance being taking them through some nice, smooth movements. As a sight resolution caller, I never call myself a sight caller as such, because that implies that you're going to have to stop and look, see where they are, so you know what to call next. Anything beyond that is going to be modules of one kind or another. If the only reason for that module is to move the dancer smoothly, that's still a module. But no, memory. Keep working on your memorized stuff. When you get a module, putting a module together, get down and walk it through. When I ran my schools, I would lay out on the floor with painter's tape, 2 grids, one north and south, one east and west. And when we would work with the new callers, I would have them get out there and go through the basic traffic pattern, back and forth, till they knew that rectangular piece of property very, very well. They knew what it'd take to turn around and go back across. Then it's just a matter of adding things to it. Well, how many different ways can I get from here to there? Well, okay, let's do step 2 away and square through, step 2 away, end circulate, center circulate. Somebody went across that grid. Still a grid, even though they're in ocean waves. Just get used to that part of that. That's the biggest tool you've got right there. Take memory? Sure. You know, memorize a singing call figure, get out there and walk it through, relate it to that grid, to where you are on that grid. And then it'll come simpler, and you can build on that forever. There's no end to what you can do. You can do what was it I said, a hinge the bucket. Brand new movement. Nobody's ever seen it. Put it in there. How did that affect the grid? Where did that go? Did I jump from a corner box to a diamond formation? That's the way to make it work. Short, simple. Work it in the simple traffic pattern. Memorize, not long figures. Memorize short, easy to use things. And I'll shut up.
Eva, another one of the tricks that I use to help memorize people is I will find a couple that's easily recognizable, preferably somebody I know, preferably somebody that's a good couple, and keep them as one of my 2 key couples most of the evening. And then all I have to do is memorize 1 couple that's next to them. I don't have to memorize 2. I just say, whom are they dancing with this tip? And hopefully it's somebody that's a good dancer and recognizable also. But if you pick 1 or 2 or 3 dancers that these are going to be people you're going to follow all night, that's another trick, that you don't have to memorize 4 people. You just have to add 1 couple to the one you've memorized for the longest time already.
Yeah, I finally figured out that if I could find a couple, for me, most of my calling, I mean, almost all of it really, is in classes where everyone is changing partners every tip. Okay, so, but in every class, I think I usually at least have 1 couple that won't switch partners. And I finally figured out, okay, I'll follow them and figure out, or if I could do the mental image stuff and just pick out 1 guy, that's all I need is 1 guy, then, you know, I could follow him. You know, that's kind of what I'm thinking.
I understand. I called one of the clubs I called for years and years was a college club, and they changed partners every tip. And they frequently changed gender every tip just because that was fun for them. And I know that one tip, when a particular guy and a particular gal were dancing together, they would exchange gender off and on throughout the tip.
Yeah.
But they were good enough dancers so that I could spot when one was in the boys' position or one was in the girls' position, and I could still slide off of them because I knew they were good enough dancers. They were going to be in one of the two correct spots. I think there's another thing that I was trying to remember some of the other tricks. One of the tricks I did, especially in the people changing partners, is sort of a social gossip in my own mind. Oh, he's dancing with her this tip. And just sort of trying to picture them paired up as a social thing. And again, don't tell anybody what your ideas are, or clues, or what you write down. But that was one of the other tricks that worked for me, was this social pairing, gossipy thing in my own mind.
Don?
Yeah.
Okay.
Don?
Yeah, it's Daryl.
I always tend to go back to the newbie college. All of this site resolution stuff, and we're trying to remember site cup. Newbie callers have no business doing site resolution. None. That's my opinion, and I'm allowed that. Those of you that have clubs, you're calling on a regular basis, you're teaching lots of classes and everything. Sure, you're going to work into that site resolution. It's so simple. But what you've got to learn right up front before you do anything else is how to move dancers. And you need to be able to do it. Just let me finish, Don. You need to be able to do it under the circumstances that you have to live with. Now, when I started calling, the caller that taught us how to dance and everything let me get up once during the regular dance and do a guest tip. There's no way that I would have learned how to sight resolve or been able to use any of the resolution techniques or move the dancers effectively at that point in time. If you're a real newbie, you need to have either memory, which everything is memory, modules, because that's part of memory, mental image, you have to have memory. All of the methods are the same, but for the starting out calls, if you're not teaching and calling on a regular basis, just put sight resolution out of your mind. It takes lots to be able to be very effective resolving by sight, because it always begins with something before the resolution. It's called square dance. And the dancing comes before the resolution. The last thing you want to do is resolve. And if you go to a school to learn how to sight resolve, you're wasting your money if you're a newbie. You need to learn how to move the dancers. And the way to learn how to move the dancers is get very, very familiar with that traffic pattern and memorize as many modules as you can and apply them there. Once you learn how to move the dancers, then you can start concentrating on the individual things like saying, I've got two couples here. What can I do with them as two couples? And resolve them back to their beginning. Now, during this pandemic, we've got groups out there that are doing two couple dances. Now, somebody's doing that. It's got the same two couples in front of them. They can learn all of the different things they can do as two couples, which is somewhere between 80 and 90% of what you're going to be calling anyway, and how to resolve those two couples. That'll come natural after a while. But till it does, don't worry about who you're going to pick as sight couples. It's just a waste of time, my opinion. Okay, Don.
I guess I was cutting in on that because we were talking about different memory things and how to memorize, like how to memorize names, and how to again, when I think of memory, it's memorizing who started with whom. I agree with you that I don't believe sight calling is the way to start calling or this way to start teaching newer dancers. But half of our people in our discussion here are much more experienced, and so the memory techniques, no matter what you're trying to memorize, are good for the newer callers and the more experienced callers.
Yeah, but I'll go back to the newbies every time, you know that, because we need you. We need the new callers. We're going to need you a lot more here in about 6 or 7 months when we start, at least in the USA, trying to rebuild our activity. It's going to be tough, gang. It really is. And now you might not have the isolation in the other countries that we have here, but there are no dances here. There are none. And little bits, I mean, compared to what the activity is, there might as well be none. It's going to have to be rebuilt from the bottom up, because by the time they get that vaccine figured out and get it out to the population, we're going to be a year, at least a full year, without any dances. So let's take care of the newbies.
So
my
to
whole
the how we learn point, I completely lucked out in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area here. Rich Reel, and I guess he didn't learn, he did this not terribly long before I started dancing, but I always think of him as having been calling for forever. Got together a bunch of people and that would dance as checkers for him. And this is a tradition which has continued up until the COVID-19 thing, of new callers. We go down and we spend a Saturday calling to each other and some absolutely wonderful regular dancers who show up and dance checker. And that simultaneously helps with, the focus is absolutely on new callers and on site calling, in that it's about, can you keep the dancers moving? If you just call right and left through, pass through, trade by over and over again, that's fine. It's about building the rhythm and the calling, and in the process of that. So I'm kind of thinking about, how can I, if I can find new callers, and beyond the fact that I have this resource in the Bay Area that I can do, help new callers have something other than that single tip where they don't have a chance to feel out the floor. They're walking in cold, they're reading their pre-prepared material, and it really, I don't think, helps them become a caller nearly as well as being able to take 15 minutes, beat their brains against a square, dance for half an hour, another hour, and then take 15 minutes again and keep doing that over and over again, so they actually have the opportunity to learn.
Well, we have a Callers and Cuers Club up here, a couple of associations where they get together and then they bring in some dancers, and we have a meeting for like an hour of discussion, then we bring in dancers for another hour, and then they're like our dancing checkers. So that's one way so the newbies can get up and give it best shot, and they have the callers there to mentor them as we do it. It works out pretty slick when we get the dancers.
I see in the chat that Mikhail says, I use the memory palace techniques to remember dancers. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, if I look at my first dance person, I have a picture, like an elephant, for example. I zoom in on the ear and see the other dancers on the same size as the ear. And that makes me remember the first person. And I pick up like a foot, like a second spot, zoom in and take my next dancers. And when I put this like elephant on a place in my memory palace, and that way I can go back and remember my dancers.
That's a technique I
don't understand that.
The essence of what he's saying is creating a room or a picture in your mind, which is a compartment or whatnot, which is a specific palace for that specific item. So he relates an individual to a certain part of an elephant, or an individual to a certain part or location, and he just puts that picture and locks it into that thing. So you can always go back into that room, see that elephant, see where's that. Is that about correct, Michael?
Yes, I would say yes.
John, when you said you were have people get together, how big an area is it that you're talking about coverage-wise that this group gets together?
Well, the Northwest Callers and Cures Association, they meet in Maple Valley up here in Washington. They're like, I don't know, they go from Tacoma up to Seattle. I guess it's probably about 10 or 12 clubs they cover. And then I have a Callers and Cures group that I meet with in here in Gorse. We have like 4 or 5 clubs that we draw from. And when it's working fine, we get the caller, the dancers come in for the second hour of the meeting, and then we all use them as checkers, and we dance them around. Doesn't always work that well if you can't get the dancers there, but most of the time when they do it, it's kind of fun.
Is that a statewide region? Because I'm trying to picture how that would work in my area, because like we have one state organization, there's no other associations or anything around. So is what you're talking about, is that a state organization or is it more local?
Well, it's a local callers, like the one we're at. It's Peninsula Callers and Cures up here in Kitsap Peninsula. So it's I guess the association of the club in the state, the Peninsula Division, I guess it is, of Washington State. So that represents that. And then Northwest Callers and Cures, they do another area down, I think it's the Rainier Division or something like that.
So how many callers are in that one little small organization?
Well, the one I'm in has, like, we have like 5 callers, and then they have 2 or 3 newbies. Then the one down in Northwest Callers and Cures, they probably have 10 or 12 full-time callers, and then they have some new people come in there too.
Okay.
It's kind of I don't know, you should have, I would imagine everybody's probably got some local Callers and Cures type groups.
No, because that's what I'm thinking, because like we have 13 callers in the whole state.
Oh.
So that's why I'm trying to figure out how big a group you're talking about.
I guess I can't quantify how big of an area. It's the greater Tacoma Olympia areas where the Northwest Callers and Cures, and then the Peninsula Callers and Cures is mainly up on the Kitsap Peninsula, and I guess we draw a little bit from up on the Olympic Peninsula too.
I was fortunate enough, Janet, to be able to get dancers that I could push around as checkers. I danced at one local club, and they were a very social club, let's put it that way. And one time I was dancing a little further away at a club known for its higher level, eventually turned into an A1 club, but much better dancers, and hired callers that were not as gentle on the dancers. And I saw 1 or 2 couples from the club that I danced locally with. And I said, are there any more like you at home? I'd like to get a square together so I could practice. And I had enough room in my family room to do that. And they said, sure, we can get 3 other couples together. And so we had a session in my family room, and everybody said, this is a lot of fun. We should do this again. And one of the other
couples, hear you. I'm listening to something else.
And one of the other couples said, well, we've got room for 2 squares in our family room. Let's go meet there. And eventually we had 2 squares, and it was a social group, but it gave me a chance to practice, and they tolerated my whatever I was doing. It was a social group, so we got together in the dining room and had refreshments and talked a lot after each session. And eventually they said, as we were meeting month after month after month, we should come up with a name for the group. And they didn't call themselves checkers or dolls. They called themselves pawns, and they gave the name Don's Pawns to the club, to the group. And over the years, we went anywhere from 1 square. We met for 18 years before I moved away, but we had anywhere from 1 square to 6 squares. It was a chance for me to practice. And for 18 years, there was different kinds of practice I needed. And I was doing a lot with experimental calls at the time and writing note services featuring experimental calls. So it became an experimental group where we would try something new, 1 or 2 or 3 new calls, and see how they responded to it. But it was a social group with an A1 bass and any other call I felt like using, and just good dancers that were willing to play the game with me. And more than once, we would have another caller or 2 come in and show up and dance with us. Chris, did you ever dance with us at Don's Ponds? I can't remember.
I don't think I ever got over there, but I heard you refer to them a lot, you know, when you would talk about trying out new calls and stuff, and new ones that you wrote too.
Daryl?
Yeah, I think we only have a few more minutes left.
Oh my goodness.
For the real session. One thing, if I'm ever remembered for anything in the schools that I've taught through the years, it's this one phrase: callers call.
Say it again.
Callers call. You can push checkers. You can read material. You can attend these Zoom sessions. You can go to school after school after school. Until you're up there on the microphone with dancers in front of you and putting that stuff to work, you'll never learn to call. You have to have dancers in front of you in order to become a caller. Okay, with that said, and with just a minute left, anybody have a particular question, any question at all about calling? I do try to keep my the things that I add on, like I say, to the newbie callers. I was a professional. I've been a caller coach for many, many years. So I'm supposed to have the answers. But if I'm sure that I don't, I know Don does. So are there any questions for me, please? Now a good time to do it. Don't be afraid. I don't bite.
I got a question, Daryl. What's the difference between a professional caller and a full-time caller?
You're all professionals. If you get paid, you're a professional. I made my living off square dance calling for probably about 35 or 40 years. Didn't have another job, didn't have a pension coming in. It's just the way that I paid my bills. It's a job that I think that a good many would like to have until they got it. A good friend of mine, Jerry Junk, I'm sure most of you are familiar with Jerry. His wife, Sharon, looked at the 2 of us some years back and said, "You guys are not normal." And she's right. I spent my winters in Arizona. I retired from doing that. After 16 years of doing it, I retired in 2003 from doing that. At that time that I retired, I was calling 18 dance sessions per week, from beginners through A2. Quick calling challenge probably 15 years before all of that. I spent probably, let's see, I made 2 trips coast to coast across the United States during the summer, different town every night, lots of miles, lots of miles. That's a full-time caller, making his living at. A national caller has more to do with how many people in the nation knows who you are without having to look it up, I think. Traveling nationally is part of what brings that on. I would suspect being a recording artist, I produced square dance music for well over 35 years. There aren't many things in square dancing that I haven't done. That's why I try to put myself down at the beginning again with the newbies. I really, really like doing that because I still, after all these years, I got a pretty good memory. And I can remember how hard it was when I started to get the information and how confusing some of the stuff was when it came at me. You know, like that. Where was it? On one of these sessions, we were talking about sequence. And after my 10 lessons of calling, learning how to call 10 lessons, learn how to call, the biggest thing I walked away with was I just knew I'd missed something really, really important because they spent so much time on this sequence thing. Nobody ever said you're either in or out and don't worry about it until you want to get a corner. So, you know, but I just thought that I was not smart enough to do it.
Daryl, isn't sequence a sequence of calls and we call that a module now? Never mind. I'm just trying to come up with an end for this for our thing here. I do want to because we are at the hour, even though I agree fully with Daryl that we need new callers and new blood just to keep our activity going so that we can share what we know and love. Can be so much fun and want to share that with others. And because this session that we've been doing for 15 weeks now, I think, has been basically advertised or announced only on the Facebook newbie callers thing. It's not a session only for newbie callers. And I look around at the faces here and I know many, many of you are very experienced callers. I'd say something of, and I've been trying to set these up with speakers and keep the topic of things that are of interest to both the newer callers and the more experienced callers, and things that are specifically aimed at the newer callers. We're welcoming help from the experienced callers to round out the topic. So feel free to talk about, you know, bring up any level you want, but keeping in mind that we're doing that. And one last comment from Daryl, because he's waving his hand.
If you're an experienced caller, if you have a club, you have a responsibility on your own part to mentor new callers. We have a responsibility to the activity to train our own replacements. Now that might sound kind of hard, but there's lots of room for lots of callers out there, and then the activity is not going to grow back to anything significant if we don't have the callers coming. So if you have the place to do it, start working with somebody. So even the things that we talked about here this morning that you already knew and you said, well, let's waste the time. Well, it isn't. Maybe it'll give you an idea of how to present this stuff to somebody that doesn't know it. We can use a lot more caller instructors as well as callers. So with that said, I'll bow out. My time's over. Thank you so much for putting up with me. I know sometimes it gets hard, but remember, I am available, email, any way that you want. If you want to learn something about it and you have specific questions, get a hold of me. I'm here. Heck, I'm just like you. I'm sitting around the house wondering what to do with myself most of the time. And so I do appreciate this, Don. Thank you for letting me do it.
My usual ending is really thanking you, Daryl, for keeping us entertained and learning and thinking for the session. My thanks to you, Dan, for pushing the wires and the toggle switches and whatever it takes behind the scene, like remembering Just remembering to have thumbs up, huh? And remembering to record this and happily posting it now that you have fiber.
So we have John in the chat asking what's Daryl's email. So Daryl, if you want to share that some way.
If you look on the screen, you see my name. It's on mine. It should be on everybody.
Yes.
Is it there? Well, if you put an @ between Daryl and Clendenin and put a .net at the end of it, you've got my email address. It's daryl@clendenin.net. Makes it simple.
Good. And again, I want to thank all of you for joining us. I was going to say for putting up with me, for putting up with Daryl. No, for joining us, joining in on the conversation. It's a nice sized group that we have. You're more than welcome to invite other people to join us, but I don't want to come up with 150 people. I'd feel great, but we'd have troubles having a good conversation there. And generally we've been doing that. So thanks again all. I'm seeing something else in the chat. Okay. And with that, we're formally ended. And now, as usual, Dan will probably keep the thing open if other people want to continue chatting about this or related things. Thanks again, Daryl.
I can leave it open and always pass off the hosting opportunities to somebody else so that if I leave the mute off, people can shut me up.
Thank you, everybody.
And I'll stop recording now.